March 15, 1987. Victor Kowalski had coordinated stunts for 43 films without a single fatality. Franco Marchetti was the star who demanded they skip the safety checks because the light was perfect. When the cables snapped and 3 crew members plummeted 60 feet to their deaths, Franco looked Victor dead in the eye and said 6 words that would haunt him forever. "This never happened because of me. The LAPD ruled it equipment failure. The families got settlements. Franco became a legend. And Victor Kowalski disappeared into shame, carrying a secret that would eat him alive for 36 years. But secrets have a way of finding their way home." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The garage door rattled like old bones as Victor Kowalski yanked it open, his arthritic fingers protesting against the October morning chill. 36 years of carrying guilt had bent his 6-foot frame into something smaller, more careful. The kind of man who checked twice before crossing empty streets and never made eye contact in grocery store lines. Kowalski's auto repair squatted on the wrong side of Bakersfield like a wounded animal, its hand-painted sign faded to the color of dried blood. Victor had chosen this place deliberately, far enough from Hollywood that the ghosts couldn't follow, close enough that he could still smell the desert wind that reminded him of location shoots in better days. He'd been Victor Arnie Kowalski once, the man who choreographed impossible car chases and death-defying falls, the coordinator who made actors look like heroes and heroes look invincible. Now he was just Vic, the guy who fixed transmissions and rotated tires for farmhands and oil workers who'd never heard of Franco Marchetti. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Victor surveyed his domain: 3 bay doors, tools that belonged in a museum, and a desk buried under invoices he couldn't pay. The morning ritual was always the same: coffee, inventory, and the careful avoidance of looking at the framed photo turned face down in the bottom drawer. Sarah's graduation from USC Film School, the last time she'd smiled at him like he mattered. His daughter was 34 now, a producer climbing Hollywood's ladder with the kind of determination that reminded him of himself at that age. She thought he was a failure who'd cracked under pressure, a man whose incompetence had killed 3 people and destroyed his own career. It was easier to let her believe that than tell her the truth about Franco Marchetti. The bell above the door chimed, and Victor looked up from his coffee to see a figure silhouetted against the morning sun. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the careful grace of someone who'd spent decades being watched. The man stepped into the light, and Victor's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the concrete floor. Franco Marchetti stood in his garage. 36 years had silvered Franco's hair and carved lines around his eyes, but the presence was unmistakable. This was the man who'd built an empire on other people's blood, who'd accepted lifetime achievement awards while Victor fixed carburetors in exile. "Hello, Arnie." Franco's voice carried the same authority that had commanded film sets and boardrooms. "You look exactly like I expected." Victor's throat closed. His hands began to shake, the same tremor that had plagued him since that March day when the cable snapped. "Get out!" "I don't think you understand why I'm here." Franco stepped closer, his Italian leather shoes silent on the oil-stained floor. "I need you," I said. "Get out." Franco smiled, the expression that had charmed audiences and critics for 4 decades. "One job, Arnie. One final film, the biggest stunt sequence ever attempted, and I want the man who really coordinated those shots on Iron Thunder." The words hit Victor like a physical blow. In 36 years, no one had ever acknowledged what really happened on that set. How Franco had demanded increasingly dangerous stunts, how he'd overruled every safety protocol, how he'd insisted on multiple takes until fatigue and corner cutting made tragedy inevitable. "That man died in 1987, Victor whispered. "No, he didn't. He just learned to hide." Franco pulled a manila envelope from his jacket and placed it on Victor's desk. $50 million budget, full creative control over the stunt sequences, and a chance to work with your daughter. Victor's head snapped up. "Sarah?" "She's producing. Brilliant girl, really. Driven. She has no idea I'm here, of course. Thinks I'm in pre-production meetings all week." Franco's smile widened. "She speaks about you sometimes, about the father who let down everyone who counted on him. Leave her out of this. She's already in this. Has been since she decided to make films instead of selling insurance. Franco leaned against the desk, close enough that Victor could smell his expensive cologne. The question is whether she learns the truth from me or from you. Victor's vision blurred at the edges, the way it had during panic attacks in those first years after the accident. You wouldn't. I wouldn't want to. But this film gets made, Arnie, with you or without you. And if certain stories about equipment failure and negligent coordinators happen to surface during production, Franco shrugged. Well, Hollywood loves a good tragedy, especially when the villain is already conveniently disgraced. The garage fell silent except for the drip of oil from a rusted drum and the distant hum of traffic on Highway 58. Victor stared at the envelope, knowing it contained either his redemption or his final destruction. Franco straightened his jacket and moved toward the door. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, I start making calls. He paused at the threshold, backlit again by California sunshine. Oh, and Arnie? Sarah's been looking for an excuse to respect you again. Don't let pride get in the way of giving her one. The door chimed as Franco disappeared, leaving Victor alone with his ghosts and a choice that would determine whether the truth about Iron Thunder died with him or destroyed everything he'd spent 36 years trying to protect. Victor stood frozen in the sudden silence, staring at the manila envelope as if it might explode. The garage felt smaller now, the walls pressing inward with the weight of Franco's visit. Coffee dripped steadily from the broken mug at his feet, each drop counting seconds in a countdown he couldn't stop. His hands moved without conscious thought, fingers tracing the envelope's edges. Inside would be contracts, storyboards, maybe even location photos, all the pieces of a machine designed to drag him back into the world that had spit him out. The paper felt expensive between his weathered fingertips, nothing like the cheap invoices and past due notices that usually crossed his desk. Sarah's been looking for an excuse to respect you again. The words echoed in the garage's hollow spaces, bouncing off oil-stained walls and settling into the cracks where his old life had leaked through. Victor walked to his desk and pulled open the bottom drawer, his movements careful and deliberate. Beneath the stack of unpaid bills lay the photograph he'd hidden face down for 2 years. Sarah at 22, radiant in her graduation cap, her arm around his shoulders like she actually wanted him there. Her eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had carried her through USC Film School on scholarships and determination. She'd inherited his stubborn streak and her mother's grace, a combination that made her formidable in an industry that crushed weaker souls. He remembered that day with crystalline clarity, the California sunshine, the proud parents surrounding them, the way Sarah had introduced him to her professors as my father, the stunt coordinator. Past tense even then, but spoken with something that might have been pride, before she learned the details of what happened on Iron Thunder, before the headlines and the lawsuits and the slow realization that her father wasn't a tragic hero, but a man who'd let 3 people die. Victor's phone buzzed against the silence. A text from Miguel Santos, his only employee, a kid barely older than Sarah who treated the failing garage like it was Universal Studios, and Victor like he was still somebody worth learning from. Running late, boss. Transmission parts got delayed. Be there by noon. Miguel didn't know about Hollywood. To him, Victor was just Vic, the guy who'd given him a chance when nobody else would, who taught him the difference between temporary fixes and permanent solutions. The kid worked twice as hard as Victor paid him for, showing up early and staying late, turning routine repairs into minor mechanical symphonies. The garage held pieces of the life Victor had built in exile. Miguel's toolbox organized with military precision, the coffee maker that brewed the same bitter comfort every morning, the radio that played classic rock to fill the spaces between conversations. Small things that mattered to nobody but him. A life measured in oil changes and brake jobs rather than explosions and applause. Outside, Bakersfield moved through its usual rhythms. Trucks hauled produce toward distant cities, workers grabbed coffee before shift changes, mothers dropped children at schools whose names Victor had never learned. He'd made himself invisible here, just another face in a town that minded its own business. The anonymity had cost him everything, Sarah's respect, professional satisfaction, the electricity that came from creating impossible things, but it had also given him something precious: safety. Franco's cologne still lingered in the air, an expensive ghost that didn't belong among the honest smells of motor oil and worn leather. Victor could picture him now, probably in some Beverly Hills hotel suite, making calls to people who still mattered. Franco had always been good at that, making people feel like they needed him more than he needed them. The envelope sat on the desk like a loaded gun, waiting for a decision Victor wasn't sure he was brave enough to make. Inside were answers to questions he'd stopped asking years ago. What if he could work again? What if Sarah could see him as something other than a cautionary tale? What if the truth about Iron Thunder finally came out, not as his confession but as Franco's? But truth was a dangerous thing in Hollywood. It had sharp edges and inconvenient timing. The truth about March 15, 1987, wouldn't just vindicate Victor, it would destroy Franco Marchetti, the man who'd built an empire on other people's sacrifices. And Franco didn't strike Victor as someone who'd go quietly into career suicide. Not after 4 decades of careful image management. The coffee maker finished its cycle with a satisfied gurgle, filling the garage with the smell of burned grounds and false optimism. Victor poured himself a fresh cup, his movements automatic and meditative. The routine helped slow his racing thoughts, reminded him of simpler problems that could be solved with the right tools and enough patience. 48 hours, 2 days to decide whether to risk everything he'd built for a chance at everything he'd lost. 2 days to choose between Sarah's safety and Sarah's respect. 2 days to figure out whether some silences were worth breaking, even if they shattered everything in their wake. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the garage and casting long shadows that reached toward corners where the past refused to stay buried. Victor took another sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth steady his nerves. The shadows had shifted across the garage floor when his phone rang, its harsh electronic trill cutting through the morning quiet like a blade. He glanced at the screen, expecting Miguel or maybe Mrs. Henderson about her Buick's transmission. Instead, the display showed a number he hadn't seen in 3 years, but would recognize anywhere: Sarah. His finger hovered over the answer button, paralyzed by the cosmic timing. Franco's visit, the envelope waiting on his desk, and now his daughter calling from whatever soundstage or conference room had claimed her morning. Victor's thumb trembled as he accepted the call. "Dad?" Sarah's voice carried that particular Hollywood efficiency, warm but hurried, affectionate but bounded by invisible time constraints. "Do you have a minute?" "Yes, of course." Victor set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care, as if sudden movements might somehow telegraph his emotional state through the phone connection. "How are you, sweetheart?" "Good. Busy. Always busy." He could hear voices in the background, the controlled chaos of a film production. "Listen, I'm calling because something incredible just happened, and I wanted to tell you before you heard it somewhere else." Victor's blood turned to ice water. Franco had promised 48 hours. It had been less than 1. "Franco Marchetti just hired me to produce his next film." Sarah's words tumbled out in an excited rush. "Can you believe it? Franco fucking Marchetti. I'm sorry, I know you don't like when I swear, but Dad, this is everything I've been working toward. The budget is insane, the script is incredible, and he specifically asked for me. Said he'd heard about my work on Midnight in Monterey and wanted someone who understood practical effects." The garage tilted around Victor like a ship in rough seas. He gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white against the scarred wood. Through the phone, he could hear Sarah's excitement painting pictures of a future that didn't include the truth about her father's past. That's wonderful, honey." The words felt like broken glass in his throat. Really wonderful. "But here's the crazy part." Sarah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, and Victor could picture her stepping away from whatever crowd surrounded her. "The film has these massive stunt sequences, really complex stuff, and Franco mentioned that he worked with some legendary coordinators back in the day. One in particular who was supposed to be brilliant before he—" She paused, and Victor knew exactly what she was thinking. "Before he screwed up that job in the 80s. Sarah, I know it's probably nothing, and I know you don't like talking about the old days, but Franco said this coordinator's name was something like Kowalski." "Arnold Kowalski?" He called him Arnie. Another pause, longer this time. Dad, was that? Do you know who he meant? The phone slipped in Victor's sweaty palm. Across the garage, Franco's envelope seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, a countdown timer wrapped in manila paper. This wasn't coincidence. Franco had orchestrated this call, this moment, this precise intersection of past and present. He'd probably been sitting in his hotel suite when Sarah called, watching the clock and smiling that predator's smile. Dad? Are you there? Victor closed his eyes, seeing Sarah's graduation photo behind his eyelids. The way she'd looked at him then, before the stories and the shame and the slow erosion of everything a daughter should feel for her father. He thought of Miguel, who believed Victor was just a man who fixed cars and told stories about old movies. He thought of the life he'd built in Bakersfield, small and broken, but honestly earned. Yes, he whispered into the phone. I'm here. So you knew him? This Arnie Kowalski? The truth sat in Victor's throat like a stone. 36 years of careful silence pressing down on his chest. He could end it now. Tell Sarah that Arnie Kowalski hadn't been incompetent, just naive enough to trust Franco Marchetti with other people's lives. Tell her about the corner cutting and the ignored protocols and the cables that snapped because someone had decided budget mattered more than safety. Tell her that her father had been the scapegoat, not the villain. Dad? I knew him, Victor said finally, his voice barely audible above the garage's background hum. We worked together, a long time ago. Was he really as reckless as the stories say? Victor opened his eyes and stared at Franco's envelope, understanding with perfect clarity that his old life hadn't just returned, it had come to collect. The safety of anonymity, the simple dignity of honest work, the careful distance he'd maintained from anything that could hurt Sarah, all of it was already gone, dissolved the moment Franco Marchetti walked through his door. No, Victor said, his decision crystallizing with the weight of inevitability. He wasn't reckless at all. The silence stretched between father and daughter like a cable under tension, ready to snap. Victor could hear Sarah's breathing change, the way it had when she was little and processing something that didn't quite fit her understanding of the world. What do you mean? Her voice carried a new quality now, sharper, more focused. The producer in her, trained to sense when a story had deeper layers. Dad, the reports all said, I have to go. Victor's words came out strangled. Customer just walked in. It was a lie. The garage stood empty except for his ghosts and Franco's lingering cologne. But he couldn't do this over the phone. Couldn't risk saying something that would set events in motion he couldn't control. Not yet. Dad, wait. Victor ended the call and immediately powered off the phone, as if Sarah's questions might somehow reach through the dead device and drag the truth out of him. His hands shook as he shoved the phone into his pocket, the tremor spreading up his arms like infection. The coffee maker gurgled in the background, a sound that had meant comfort an hour ago, and now felt like mockery. Everything familiar had turned foreign, contaminated by Franco's presence and Sarah's unknowing proximity to a truth that could destroy them both. Victor walked to the far bay, where Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick waited with its transmission problems. Honest work, fixable problems. He grabbed a wrench and crawled under the car, seeking the refuge of simple mechanical logic. But even here, in the greasy darkness beneath Detroit steel, his mind wouldn't stop racing. Sarah was excited, genuinely thrilled to be working with Franco Marchetti, the man who'd killed 3 people and let Victor take the blame. The cosmic unfairness of it made his chest tight with something between rage and panic. His daughter, brilliant and determined and completely unaware that her greatest career opportunity was also her father's worst nightmare. The transmission leaked fluid onto Victor's face, warm and bitter. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving streaks of oil across his cheek. Under the car, he could pretend the wetness came from leaking seals instead of 36 years of accumulated grief. The bell above the door chimed. Victor's heart hammered against his ribs as footsteps crossed the concrete, measured, deliberate, too heavy to be Miguel. Franco, returning to twist the knife deeper. But the voice that called out wasn't smooth Hollywood authority. Vic, you under there? Tommy Reeves. Victor recognized the gravelly tone, roughened by decades of cigarettes and construction dust. Tommy had worked craft services on Iron Thunder, one of the crew members who'd given testimony during the investigation. A good man who'd been in the wrong place when the cable snapped. Victor rolled out from under the Buick slowly, buying time to arrange his expression into something approaching normal. Tommy stood near the desk, older and grayer but unmistakable. His eyes held the same haunted quality that Victor saw in his own mirror, the look of someone who'd watched people die and never quite recovered. "Tommy!" Victor climbed to his feet, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "Been a long time. 36 years, 4 months, 12 days. Tommy's smile held no warmth. "But who's counting, right?" They studied each other across the garage's oil-stained expanse, two survivors of a disaster that had scattered Theron Thunder crew like shrapnel. Victor had wondered sometimes what happened to the others: camera operators, grips, the assistant directors who tried to make Franco's impossible demands work. Most had probably found other careers, other lives untainted by March 15, 1987. "Heard Franco Marchetti was in town," Tommy said, his tone carefully neutral. "Thought you might want to know you weren't his only stop." Victor's throat constricted. "What do you mean?" "Made the rounds yesterday. Hit up Danny Ochoa in Riverside, he's teaching film school now. Stopped by Jenny Morrison's place in Ventura. She runs a catering company." Tommy pulled a cigarette from his pocket but didn't light it, just rolled it between his fingers like a talisman. Asked about the old crew, who was still around, who might be receptive to new opportunities. "What did you tell him?" "Same thing I told the investigators back then. Same thing I've been telling myself for 36 years. Tommy's eyes were flat, empty of everything except old fear. "Nothing. I told him nothing." But Victor could hear the lie underneath, the careful way Tommy avoided his gaze. Franco had that effect on people, the ability to make silence feel like collaboration, to turn witnesses into accomplices through simple proximity to power. "He's putting together something big," Tommy continued, "bigger than Iron Thunder, and he wants people who understand how things really work, people who know when to keep their mouths shut." The wrench slipped from Victor's fingers, clattering against the concrete floor with a sound like breaking bones. Franco wasn't just threatening him, he was rebuilding the old crew, gathering the survivors who'd learned to live with blood on their hands, people who'd choose silence over truth because they'd already chosen silence once before. "I can't do this again, Vic." Tommy's voice cracked. "I'm too old, and I've got grandkids now. But he knows where to find us all."